The road stretched out like an old scar, endless, cracked, and half forgotten. Dust rolled beneath the tires of a pickup that had seen too much sun, too much silence. Behind the wheel sat Jack Turner, 47, face carved by time and loss. Beside him, in the passenger seat, lay Ethan, a German shepherd with gray creeping into his muzzle, eyes alert but weary, like his master's. They didn't talk, not really, but in that silence there was a rhythm, the kind of quiet that only those who have seen death can share. The radio had died long ago. The only sound left was the hum of the engine and the faint clinking of Ethan's tag against his collar. Sometimes, Jack would roll down the window and let the cold air bite his face, a reminder that he was still here, still breathing. The wind smelled of dust, rust, and old gasoline. Every few miles, abandoned towns slipped by, broken windows, sun-faded signs, gas stations turned into skeletons of steel and weeds, America's forgotten veins. And maybe that's why Jack kept driving through them, because they looked like him, left behind, once useful, now rusting quietly under a sky that didn't care. He didn't have a destination, just movement, because stopping meant remembering, and remembering meant falling back into that desert, the one that still lived behind his eyes. Nights were the hardest, when the road disappeared and the stars looked too sharp against the black. Jack would pull over, he'd kill the headlights, step out, and light a cigarette. The first inhale was always the same, a slow burn, a small mercy. Ethan would jump down beside him, sit close enough that their shadows merged. "Still awake, buddy?" Jack would murmur. Ethan's ears would twitch, and that was enough. A reply, a heartbeat in the void. The nightmares came less like dreams and more like echoes. The thump-thump of helicopter blades, the smell of cordite, sand turned red, and men calling names that never got answered. And then the silence, the kind that rang in your ears, the kind that followed you home and slept beside you, long after the medals stopped meaning anything. Jack had medals, 3 of them. They sat in a box under the passenger seat, next to a folded flag and a photograph of 6 men, young, smiling, unknowing. Only 2 were still alive. He didn't know where the other one was. Maybe on some road like this, driving nowhere for the same reasons. They lived out of that truck. Every gas stop was a gamble. Could they make it to the next town before the tank ran dry? Sometimes they ate from a can, sometimes they didn't eat at all, but Ethan never complained. He'd rest his head on Jack's leg, eyes half closed, trusting, always trusting. There was something sacred about that kind of loyalty. A dog doesn't ask who you were before. He only knows who you are now and stays anyway. One evening, they pulled into a ghost town in New Mexico, or maybe Arizona. The border didn't matter anymore. The sky was orange, bleeding into purple, and the air smelled faintly of rain that never came. Jack parked near what used to be a diner, its sign half hanging, lettuce peeled away until all that remained was in wise. He killed the engine, leaned back, and exhaled slowly. Ethan let out a low whine. "Yeah," Jack said, rubbing his fur. "I know, you're hungry. Me too." He opened a can of beans, split it unevenly, 2/3 for the dog, 1/3 for himself. The sound of Ethan eating was comforting, rhythmic. In that tiny ritual, there was peace. The world outside might have been falling apart, but here, under this broken sign, sharing cold beans with the dog, there was still a heartbeat. Jack looked at the horizon. The sun had dropped behind the mountains, leaving a faint line of fire. He took a sip of stale coffee and whispered, half to himself, half to Ethan, "Guess we're still here, you and me." The dog raised his head, ears perked. Jack smiled, tired but soft. "Yeah, you're listening. I know you are." That night, the wind came hard, rattling the truck, whistling through the cracks. Jack wrapped himself in an army blanket, the same one he'd used overseas. It still smelled faintly of dust and smoke. Ethan coiled up at his feet, breathing slow and steady. Jack couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of emptiness outside. And then, without really meaning to, he said, "Do you think we're the last ones left, Ethan?" The dog lifted his head slightly, eyes glowing in the dark. Jack chuckled quietly. "Yeah, probably just us." A pause. "To ghosts in a dead country." The words hung there, and for the first time, he didn't flinch from them. There was something almost peaceful in admitting it, because ghosts don't have to hurry. They just wander until they fade. Near dawn, Jack woke to the sound of birds. Real ones, not gunfire, not memories. He sat up, blinking at the pale light seeping through the windshield. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then he saw Ethan, still asleep, paws twitching as if chasing something in a dream. Jack smiled faintly. He reached out, scratched behind the dog's ear, and whispered, "Dream of better places, huh?" He stepped out of the truck, stretched, and looked at the diner again. The sign swayed gently in the morning breeze. There was something about it, something that made him stay a little longer than he meant to. He walked closer, ran a hand along the cracked paint. "Sonny's Diner," he murmured, reading faded letters. But it used to smell like coffee and pie. The door creaked when he pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and time. Old stools lined a counter like soldiers waiting for orders that would never come. A single mug sat upside down beside a rusted coffee maker. Jack stood there a long time, saying nothing. Ethan patted in behind him, sniffed the floor, then looked up, tail wagging just once. Slow and deliberate. Jack laughed under his breath. "Yeah," he said softly. "You're right. It's not much." He looked around again at the cracked tiles, the broken lights, the peeling wallpaper. Then his gaze softened, but at something. He crouched, resting a hand on Ethan's neck. "Maybe that's all we need. Just something." Ethan pressed closer, warm and solid and alive. Jack nodded, voice low and almost tender. "We're two broken things, buddy, but we still work somehow." He stood there until the light filled the room, catching dust motes that looked almost golden. And for the first time in years, Jack didn't feel like he was running. He looked down at his old friend and said, almost like a prayer, "We're two souls left behind. Ethan," but at least he smiled. "Faint, cracked, but real, at least we've still got each other." The storm came out of nowhere, a brown wall of dust rising from the horizon, devouring the sun as it rolled closer. Jack had seen sandstorms before, halfway around the world, but there was something lonelier about this one, a storm that didn't come from war, just the earth sighing under neglect. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, the old pickup rattling against the wind. Ethan growled low, his fur bristling at the electric taste in the air. "Easy, buddy," Jack muttered, squinting ahead. "We'll find somewhere." But out here, somewhere was a luxury. Miles of nothing. No gas stations, no motels, no light until a flicker caught his eye. At first, he thought it was lightning, then he realized it was neon faint, broken, pulsing in and out like a dying heart. He pulled off the road, tires crunching over gravel. The sign ahead leaned sideways, its rusted frame creaking in the wind. What was once bright yellow now looked more like the color of old bones. It read, "Sonny's Diner," except only two letters still glowed. Nay, the rest had gone dark. Jack parked the truck beside the building and killed the engine. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost sacred. Dust whipped through the air, scratching at his coat. He covered his face and made for the doorway. Ethan closed behind, tail low but curious. The door groaned as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of time, dust, rust, and something faintly sweet, like old syrup. Broken glass sparkled on the floor, and leaves had gathered in corners, piled like memories swept aside. Jack stepped in slowly, his boots leaving prints in the dust. The floorboards creaked under his weight, and the neon light outside pulsed through the shattered window, painting the room in waves of pink and gray. "Looks like we found ourselves a castle, huh?" he said quietly. Ethan's ears perked up at his voice, and he trotted off, sniffing through the debris, tail wagging once, twice. It was the most energy Jack had seen from him in days. Jack walked around, running his fingers along the old counter. Divine stools were torn, the red leather cracked and curling. Behind the counter, a coffee pot sat on its side, half buried under a film of dust. A few old menus lay scattered. "Sonny's breakfast special, $350. He smiled faintly. "Been a while since anyone ordered pancakes here." He moved toward the kitchen door, its paint peeled away in long strips. Ethan followed, nose twitching. The dog barked softly, a quick sound alert. "Not afraid." Jack looked down. "You smell something." Ethan sniffed again, wagged his tail. Jack tilted his head. "Guess you like it here, huh?" He didn't know why he said that. Maybe because the air in this place didn't feel dead. There was something here, not alive exactly. But remembering, he found the sink. The faucet was coated in rust, its handle stiff from years of neglect. Still, something about it made him pause. He placed his hand on it, cool, rough metal, and turned. For a moment, nothing, just silence. Then a sputter, a cough of air and grit, and finally a single, weak stream of brown water spilling out. It was the smallest sound in the world, but in that empty diner, it was deafening. Jack laughed, a quiet, disbelieving sound that cracked open something inside him. He touched the water, rubbed it between his fingers, but felt its warmth from the friction of the pipes. "Would you look at that?" he murmured. Ethan came closer, lapping curiously at the stream. Jack crouched beside him, still watching the waterfall. "It's not a miracle," he said softly, almost to himself. "It's just a rusted drop in a world that's forgotten us." He smiled, Not the kind that comes from joy, the kind that comes from remembering how to feel it. The wind outside howled, shaking the door on its hinges. Dust pressed against the windows, turning the light into a soft amber haze. Jack looked around again at the empty booths, the peeling wallpaper, the jukebox in the corner that looked like it hadn't played a song in decades. He could almost hear laughter, the kind of sound that clings to walls, long after the people are gone. He pictured the place alive, a waitress pouring coffee, someone laughing at the counter, the smell of bacon and cigarette smoke mixing with cheap perfume. It was like looking into someone else's memory, and somehow it felt like home. Ethan jumped into one of the booths, circled twice, then curled up, resting his head on the seat. Jack chuckled. "Guess you're calling Dibska." He sat across from him, stretching his legs out, and looked toward the neon sign flickering through the window. The two glowing letters and I blinked like tired eyes refusing to close. "Still trying," Jack whispered. "You're still trying." The storm beat against the diner for hours, but inside, time felt slow. Jack lit a small candle from his pack, the last one he had, and set it on the counter. The flame flickered weakly, joining the trembling glow from the sign outside. Two lights, both fragile, both refusing to die. He leaned back against the booth, eyes half closed, and listened to the sound of Ethan breathing. It reminded him of quiet nights in the barracks, the steady rhythm of life beside him, proof that someone was still there. He whispered, "Maybe this place needed us as much as we needed it." The dog's tail thumped once against the vinyl seat, as if agreeing. Hours later, the wind began to fade. The diner creaked, but held. Jack stood, stretched, and walked to the door. The sky was clearing, a bruised purple streaked with dawn. He stepped outside, looked up at the fading storm clouds, and let the cool air fill his lungs. Behind him, the neon light flickered once, twice, then steadied, faint but constant. He turned back and watched it for a long moment. The paint was cracked, the walls were falling apart, but somehow it looked alive again. He smiled to himself, a line of quiet thought forming in his chest. Sometimes, the world leaves something behind, not to forget it, but to give someone else a reason to find it. He walked back in, sat down beside Ethan, and rested a hand on his fur. "Guess we're staying here a while," he said softly. The dog nuzzled his hand, eyes warm and trusting. Outside, the wind was gone. Inside, two souls sat in the dim light of a dying sign that refused to give up. And for the first time in years, Jack Turner didn't feel like a ghost anymore. The storm had passed, leaving behind the kind of silence that only follows exhaustion, the world holding its breath after chaos. Jack Turner sat in the corner booth of Sonny's diner, his back against the cracked leather, a half-empty thermos of coffee growing cold by his side. Outside, the neon sign hummed weakly in the dark, the endwise flickering like a dying pulse. Every few seconds, the light caught the raindrops clinging to the window, turning them into little sparks before fading again. It wasn't much, but it was light. Ethan, the old German shepherd, lay curled on the floor near the counter. His fur shimmered faintly in the neon's glow, one ear twitching at every creak and whistle the Dinah made in its sleep. He was calm now, maybe even at peace. Jack envied that. "Guess this is home tonight," Jack murmured. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. The place still smelled faintly of burnt grease and dust, ghosts of bacon breakfasts, and trucker conversations long gone. Someone had left a calendar on the wall, years out of date. June 2012. The picture showed a family smiling in a field of sunflowers. Jack stared at it for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Look at that, Ethan," he said quietly. "People once thought the world would keep blooming like that. Guess they didn't see the drought coming." Ethan raised his head, blinking slowly, then dropped it back down on Jack's boots. The small warmth of his breath seeped through the worn leather. It was something living, something real, and that was enough. Jack stretched his arms, his joints cracking in protest. The boot's spinal was torn, the stuffing pushing through like tied lungs. He'd slept in worse places. Sand, mud, the back of an armored truck. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a pack of old cigarettes, then stopped himself. He hadn't smoked in years. He just liked the feeling of holding one, a habit from another life. Instead, he exhaled, slow and heavy. Outside wind brushed through the broken sign again, endwise blinking like it was struggling to remember its own name. Jack looked at it, then said softly, "It's trying, Ethan, just like us." Hours later, the Dinah settled into its rhythm, a sort of half-life between ruin and refuge. The world outside was pitch black, save for the neon heartbeat of the sign and the occasional rustle of the desert wind. Jack's body finally gave in to the weight of fatigue. He slid down in the booth, the cracked leather sighing beneath him. His eyes traced the ceiling, the water stains, the faint outline of where a ceiling fan used to hang. He thought of the war again. Not the battles, he never remembered those clearly. What haunted him were the pauses between them, the quiet stretches of waiting, the sound of boots on gravel, the soft clink of a dog tag in the dark. He used to lie awake listening for mortar. Now he listened for the hum of a dying light. Funny how peace and danger shared the same silence. He turned his head, looking at Ethan. The dog's chest rose and fell steadily. A quiet rhythm, loyal, uncomplaining. "Remember when you found that kid in Mosul?" Jack whispered. "You dragged him out from under all that rubble. You wouldn't let go until he started breathing again." Ethan's tail thumped once against the tile. Jack smiled faintly. "Yeah, you remember." He reached down, resting a hand on the dog's head. Ethan didn't move, just sighed that long, deep breath that dogs take when they finally feel safe enough to sleep, and maybe Jack felt it too. The safety, the stillness, the fragile illusion that for one night, the war had forgotten his name. Hours passed. The neon kept flickering. The diner, once a graveyard of dust and echoes, began to feel different. Not alive, not yet, but breathing again. Somewhere in the kitchen, a drop of water fell from the leaking pipe into a metal sink, plink, 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 steady as a metronome. Jack's dreams came slow, cautious, like an animal testing unfamiliar ground. He saw sunlight on wheat fields. He saw a porch, a woman's laughter, then Ethan running, young again, his fur black and gold against the horizon. No gunfire, no smoke, just wind. When Jack woke, it was dawn. The diner's windows glowed faintly with the first light, dust particles swirling like golden ash. The neon had finally gone out sometime in the night, but in its place, morning had arrived, soft, forgiving. Jack rubbed his eyes. For a moment, he didn't move. He just breathed. "Still here," he whispered to no one. Ethan stretched, yawned, then looked up expectantly. The same old ritual, new day, same hunger. Jack laughed, a low, rusty sound. All right, let's see if we can find something edible before you eat the seats." He stood, bones aching, heart strangely light. The diner felt different in daylight, less haunted, more hopeful. Maybe the broken sign, the cracked floors, the dust, all of it shimmered onto the sun, like a ruin that refused to die. He poured the last of his coffee into a tin cup, handed the empty thermos to Ethan like a joke, then said, "Guess we made it through another night, buddy." Ethan wagged his tail once, slow and sure. Jack looked toward the horizon, where the storm had left the sky washed clean. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like punishment, it felt like a beginning. Morning came slow and golden, spilling across the cracked windows of Sonny's diner. The air outside was sharp and clean after the storm, carrying that scent of dust and renewal, the smell of things that have survived. Jack Turner rubbed the sleep from his eyes, sitting up from the booth. For a moment, he wasn't sure where he was. Then the neon sign outside the broken NYs caught a shad of sunlight, and the memory returned. He was still here, still breathing, still alive. Ethan was already awake, pacing near the back door with that restless energy only dogs have, tail wagging, nose buried in some forgotten smell. Jack smiled, his voice still rough from sleep. "Find something, partner." Ethan barked once, muffled, because his mouth was full of dirt and something wooden. Jack stood and followed, his boots crunching over broken tiles and dried leaves. Near the doorway, half buried beneath the sand that had blown in over the years, Ethan had uncovered a small wooden board. The paint was faded, the lettuce fipped, but Jack could still make them out. "Home cooking with love." The words were surrounded by a faint red heart, hand-painted and almost gone. Jack crouched, brushing the dust off the sign with calloused fingers. He stared at it for a long moment, that simple, ordinary phrase stirring something quiet in him. He whispered, almost to himself, "Home cooking with love. Huh." He looked around at the empty diner, the broken windows, the silent kitchen, the chairs turned upside down on tables like tombstones. Then, softly, almost uncertainly, he said, "Maybe we could bring it back to life." That was how it started, not with a grand plan, just a man, a dog, and a feeling small, but alive. Jack rolled up his sleeves and began clearing the floor first. He swept out leaves, papers, and glass, the broom squeaking against the tile. Ethan followed every step, tail wagging like a metronome. Every few minutes, Jack would talk, just to fill the silence. "Well, guess this is the morning shift, huh?" Ethan would bark. "That's right, you're not getting paid, though." Tail wag. Bit by bit, the diner began to change. He found an old bucket in the back room, half full of rainwater. He used it to wash the counter. The grime peeled away, revealing the faint shimmer of chrome beneath. He repaired a window by hammering a few boards into place. He even fixed a loose door hinge with a nail he scavenged from a signpost outside. When he found a piece of tin roofing near the gas station ruins down the road, he dragged it back with Ethan trotting beside him, tongue out, happy just to do. Together, they patched the leaking roof, Ethan watching every move like an apprentice learning from a master. Days slipped into one another, slow and honest. Every morning, Jack woke with the sun, not because he had to, but because, for the first time in years, he wanted to. There was something to do, a purpose waiting just outside his dreams. He fixed what he could and made peace with what he couldn't. The diner was never going to be perfect, the cracks too deep, the rust too thick, but perfection wasn't the point. Each repair was a heartbeat, each nail a small defiance against the silence that had swallowed the world. At noon, he'd sit outside with Ethan, drinking instant coffee from a tin mug, staring at the road that led nowhere. The wind moved through the fields like a whisper, and sometimes, if he squinted, Jack could almost imagine seeing other people out there, travelers, soldiers, ghosts, all of them watching him rebuild something they'd long given up on. One afternoon he found a frayed electrical cable in the truck. He stripped it, rewired a few circuits, and managed to get a single light bulb to flicker in the diner again. It wasn't much a weak, trembling glow, but when it came to life, Jack laughed. It was the same laugh you hear when someone wins something small but real, a hand of cards, a coin toss, a second chance. Well, Ethan, he said, smiling at the bulb, we've got light again. Guess we're open for business, Ethan barked, tail slapping the floor. Jack patted his head. That's right, partner, home cooking with love. As the days went on, something inside Jack began to shift. He stopped dreaming about the war. He still remembered it. Sure, the smoke, the screaming, the way the ground shook when shells hit close, but now those memories didn't define his mornings. They were just ghosts passing through. What mattered now was the diner, the sound of nails tapping into wood, the smell of dust turning to metal under his hands, the sight of Ethan dragging small planks across the floor, trying to help. It wasn't grand redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. It was motion, and motion, he realized, was life. One evening, as the sun sank low and the diner glowed orange with its light, Jack stood outside, leaning against the hood of his old truck. He looked at what they'd built. The roof didn't leak anymore. The windows were patched. The sign Sonny's still only shown half its name. But somehow, that felt fitting. It didn't have to be whole to be good. Ethan came up beside him, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. Jack reached down, resting a hand on his head. You know, he said softly, I used to think life ended when the noise stopped, that when the war went quiet, there was nothing left worth waking up for. He looked at the diner, then at the dog, but I think maybe I was wrong. The wind carried the smell of dust and rust. But beneath it, something faint, something new, the scent of wood, warm under sunlight. Jack smiled. Tomorrow, we fix the stove. Ethan barked once. Yeah, Jack said. Tomorrow, that night. He slept on the same cracked leather boot, but it felt different now, softer somehow, lighter. He didn't dream of explosions or loss. He dreamt of a diner glowing in the desert, a man and a dog inside, making coffee as the sun rose. And for the first time in a long time, Jack Turner had a reason to wake up. The morning light slipped through the broken blinds like thin threads of gold. Dust hung in the air, unmoving, the kind of silence that makes you listen harder, as if the building itself were breathing. Jack Turner was on his knees behind the counter, prying loose a warped wooden panel. He'd been cleaning for hours, losing track of time as he scrubbed it, hammered, and cursed under his breath. Ethan lay stretched across the floor nearby, watching him with that patient, wordless kind of love only dogs understand. Jack grunted, the crowbar groaning against the wood. Come on, you stubborn piece. Of the panel gave way with a crack. Something small and metal fell out, hitting the floor with a hollow clink. Jack froze. He reached down, brushing aside the dust. In his hand lay a little tin box, its corners rusted, its lid sealed shut with time. Well, what do we have here? He muttered. Ethan tilted his head, ears perked. Jack pried it open. The hinges squealed like they hadn't moved in decades. Inside were bundles of old paper tied together with a faded red ribbon, letters, yellowed with age, edges curled like dry leaves. The faint scent of coffee and something sweeter, maybe vanilla, rose up from inside. He smiled, more to himself than to Ethan. Looks like this place had a heartbeat once. Jack sat down on the floor, the box between his knees. He untied the first ribbon and opened the top letter. The handwriting was neat and looping, a woman's hand. He read aloud softly, his voice echoing in the empty diner. Joe, the morning rush nearly killed me again. The grill smoked, the jukebox died, and the coffee machine leaked like it was crying for help. But you know what? I laughed. Because it's our mess. And it's ours together. Come home soon, love. Sonny, Jack smiled, eyes softening. Sonny, he said quietly. Tasting the name, he picked another letter. This one with slanted handwriting, maybe Joe's. Sonny, coffee went cold again. I'll warm it up when you're home. The neon's only half alive. But I swear it shines brighter when I think of you. If this place ever has a soul, it's your smile. Jack stopped there for a moment. His throat tightened. The wind outside moaned softly through the cracks in the window. If this place ever has a soul, he whispered. Guess it still does. Ethan gave a quiet whine and nudged his arm, as if agreeing. Jack read for hours. Letters about slow mornings, songs on the jukebox. The regulars who came in for pie and stayed for laughter. Notes about the weather, about dreams, about the thousand small things that make a life. They weren't grand or tragic. They were ordinary, and that's what made them feel holy. Toward the bottom of the box, Jack found a final letter, no envelope, no date, just paper thin as breath. He opened it carefully. Joe, if the world ever forgets us, promise me someone kind will find this place again. Promise me they'll feel what we built, not from the walls, but from the warmth that lingers. Jack stared at those words for a long time. His lips trembled, but he smiled. Someone kind, he repeated softly. Then, to Ethan, guess that's us. Partner. Ethan wagged his tail, slow and sure. That night, when the sun dipped low and the world turned gold, Jack cleaned each letter one by one, laying them on the counter like sacred things. The paper glowed under the single bulb they'd managed to wire days ago. At the bottom of the tin, tucked beneath the letters, he found a photograph, black and white, edges frayed. A man and a woman stood in front of Sonny's diner, arms around each other, smiling the kind of smile that only comes from loving what you built. He traced their faces with his thumb. Sonny and Joe. He murmured, guess we're keeping your place warm for a while. He searched through a drawer, found an old nail, and hammered the photo onto the wall above the counter. It hung crooked, but he didn't mind. He stepped back, hands on his hips. Perfect enough. Before heading outside, Jack grabbed a piece of chalk from the drawer. The old sign above the diner's front door still reclosed for repairs, the paint cracked and peeling. He wiped away the dust and wrote, in uneven letters, Sonny's coming back. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the words. The desert wind tugged at his sleeves, carrying the scent of rust and sand and maybe, just maybe, coffee. Ethan sat beside him, pressing his shoulder against Jack's leg. You know, Jack said, they built this place with love, and we're patching it together with the same thing. Maybe that's how you bring something back from the dead, one act of kindness at a time. Ethan gave a soft bark, tail brushing the ground. Jack smiled. Yeah, one at a time. Inside, the diner glowed faintly in the dusk. The light bulb flickered, throwing soft shadows across the photo of Sonny and Joe. For a heartbeat it almost looked like they were smiling right at him. Jack sat down in the booth near the window, Ethan curling up at his feet. He didn't light a fire or turn on the radio. He just sat there in the quiet, a man, a dog, and the ghosts of good people who once made this place home. He whispered, almost to himself, people don't really vanish, do they? Not if someone keeps what they loved alive. Ethan's tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, the neon sign sputtered, coughed, and glowed faintly, the NY still flickering, refusing to die. Jack looked at it and smiled. Yeah, he said softly, it's still trying. That night, Sonny's diner wasn't just a forgotten building anymore. It was a bridge between what was and what could be again. And as the stars rose above the desert, the letters inside their tin box whispered the same quiet truth Jack had begun to feel in his bones. Kindness never dies. It just waits to be found again. It started with a rumor, nothing fancy, just a line passed between hands at the grocery store, across the counter at the post office, whispered over the static of an old radio. They say a veteran's fixing up the old Sonny's diner with his dog. In a town like Marlow Creek, that was enough to stir something. News didn't travel fast here, it wandered, the way tumbleweeds did, slow but sure, rolling through the dry streets until it reached every porch and every heart. One morning as Jack hammered loose siding onto the front wall, a small pickup truck pulled into the lot. The engine coughed twice before dying. Out stepped a woman in her 50s, wearing a red flannel shirt and a smile that came easy. Morning, she called out. You're the one bringing this place back to life, Al. Jack wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to yet still a long way from living. The woman nodded, holding up a paper bag. While I run the grocery store down on Main, figured you might not have much stocked yet. She handed him the bag, still warm. Inside were 2 loaves of bread, slightly misshapen but fresh, and a jar of honey. Didn't cost me much. she said before he could protest. Bread's from yesterday's batch, but around here, we don't let good food or good folks go to waste. Jack hesitated, then smiled. Appreciate it, ma'am. Carol, she corrected, and don't thank me yet. You'll see others coming too. She wasn't wrong. By the end of the week, the diner's dirt parking lot began to see more tire tracks than it had in years. Frank, a retired plumber who smelled faintly of tobacco and motor oil, showed up one afternoon with a metal toolbox and a grin. Heard you're trying to run water through pipes older through sin, he said. Let's see what we can do before you blow yourself up. For 3 hours, Jack and Frank crawled beneath the diner, fixing lines and cursing rust. When the faucet finally coughed and spat out a stream of clean water, both men laughed like schoolboys. Guess she's still got life in her, Frank said, slapping the sink. Jack nodded. Yeah, maybe we all do. Then came the kids. A group of high schoolers from Mallow Creek High showed up one Saturday with paint cans and brushes, still smelling of cheap perfume and summer air. One of them, a tall boy named Luke, shouted, "We heard you could use a hand." Jack tried to wave them off. You sure you don't have better things to do on a Saturday? The girl next to Luke shrugged. Nah, my grandpa used to come here with grandma for pie, said this was the only place she'd smile. Figured we'd help bring that smile back, so they painted sloppy, bright strokes of white and turquoise, laughter echoing off the diner's walls. Ethan followed them around, tail wagging like a metronome of joy. By sunset, the once spewing exterior of Sonny's diner gleamed again under the desert light. No one got paid, no one asked to. They came because something in them wanted to see the lights come on again, not just the neon ones, but the kind that lived behind the ribs. Every small act became part of something larger. Carol's bread on the counter, Frank's patched pipes, the kids' brushstrokes on the wall. Even the air changed, less like dust, more like breath. One night, after everyone had gone home, Jack stood in the doorway with Ethan beside him. The sky stretched wide and black above the diner, pricked with stars. Inside, a single light bulb glowed behind the counter, reflecting off the chrome coffee pots they'd polished earlier that day. Jack took a deep breath, listening to the quiet hum of electricity, the sound of life returning. He turned to Ethan. You noticed that? Ethan looked up, tail brushing the floor. People, Jack said softly. They're coming back. He crouched down and rubbed the dog's neck. Guess kindness works like that. One spark, then another. Over the next few days, the diner became a kind of meeting ground. Not open yet, not really, but alive in its own quiet way. Carol would stop by after closing her store, bringing die-old pastries. Frank showed up again, this time fixing the jukebox without being asked. The high school kids came back to hang a string of fairy lights in the window. And Ethan, well, Ethan became the star of the show. Every time someone new showed up, he'd trot out proudly, wagging his tail, letting them know they were welcome. The little kids from town came just to pet him, sometimes leaving Huff-eaten sandwiches by his bowl. Someone even made him a call with a brass tag that read, Sonny's Guardian. Jack laughed when he saw it. Guess you got promoted, Ethan barked once, proud as could be. But what touched Jack most wasn't the help, it was the quiet way it all happened. No speeches, no big talk, no promises, just small, steady acts of goodness. Like when Carol replaced the cracked window without saying a word, or when Luke left a can of blue paint by the door with a note that said, or touch-ups, or when Frank fixed the back door hinge so it wouldn't squeak anymore. Jack had seen the worst in people, in war, in loss, in the long silence that followed both, but here, in this forgotten town with its cracked roads and weathered hands, he found something else, something soft, something real. He felt trust again, and that scared him a little, the way all fragile, beautiful things do. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert in gold, Jack stood outside the diner with Ethan by his side. The sign above them, Sonny's Coming Back, glowed faintly, powered by a solar wire the kids had rigged. Down the road, the first street light flickered on. Carol waved from her truck as she drove past. Jack lifted a hand in return, his chest tight in a way that wasn't sadness anymore, just full. You know, he said to Ethan, maybe this place isn't just coming back. Maybe we are. Ethan pressed against his leg, looking up with bright, steady eyes. Jack chuckled softly. Yeah, boy. Maybe kindness ain't something you teach. Maybe it's just something you remind people they already have. The wind picked up, carrying the faint hum of laughter from down the street. For the first time in a long while, the China didn't look lonely. It looked like it was waiting for morning, for coffee, for the next act of quiet goodness to walk through its door. That night, as Jack turned off the lights and the stars took their shift, he whispered into the stillness, kindness doesn't shout, it spreads. And somewhere in the dark, Ethan's tail thumped once against the floor, the sound of a heart agreeing. It was a quiet morning, the kind where sunlight doesn't rise. It leaks through the clouds, slow and gentle, like it's careful not to wake the world too soon. Jack was out front, wiping dust from the diner windows, when he saw the old Ford pickup pull into the lot. The truck was the kind you didn't see much anymore, long, rusted, carrying more stories than metal. The driver's door creaked open, and a man stepped out. Mid-50s, maybe early 60s, broad shoulders, hands that looked like they'd built or fixed something most of their life. He wore a canvas jacket, and his eyes blue, steady, lingered on the diner's sign. "Sonny's coming back." He stood there for a long while, like he was measuring time by breath. Then, in a low voice, he said, "I never thought I'd see those words again." Jack turned, cautious but kind. "You knew the place." The man gave a small, almost broken smile. "Yeah, you could say I grew up here." Inside the diner, sunlight scattered across the counter, catching on the chrome coffee pots and the framed photo Jack had hung on the wall, Sonny and Joe, frozen in a black and white smile from 50 years ago. The man walked up to it slowly, his fingers brushing the glass. "That's my mom and dad," he whispered. "Sonny and Joe. I'm Joe Jr." Jack froze for a moment. Then he said softly, "Well, Joe Jr., I guess I owe you an apology. I've been borrowing your family's dream." Joe shook his head. "No. Looks to me like you've been keeping it alive." They sat in the booth by the window, the one Sonnen's letters he'd mentioned, the one where the light hits right before noon. Joe Jr. looked around, eyes tracing every corner, the patched roof, the freshly painted walls, the humming refrigerator that still sounded like it might give up any second. "My mom used to say this place had its own heartbeat," he said. "You could feel it if you stayed quiet enough." Jack nodded. "I believe her." After a while, Joe Jr. offered to help. "I work electrical," he said. "Got some tools and spare wire in the truck. Looks like you've been running on half a miracle and one bad outlet." Jack chuckled. "You're not wrong." So they got to work, for hours. The two men moved around the diner like old bandmates relearning a song. Jack held the ladder while Joe stripped the wires. Sparks flew in brief, golden flashes, tiny bursts of light against the shadowed ceiling. Neither of them spoke much. They didn't have to. There's a kind of silence that only two working men can share, not empty, not awkward, but comfortable. Every now and then, Joe Jr. would say something small, like tossing pebbles into a deep pond. "Dad built that counter by hand, maple wood." While said it lasts longer than both of them. Jack smiled. Looks like he was right. A moment later, Joe added, "Mom used to hum when she cooked. Even when the place was empty, she'd hum like she had a full house listening." Jack looked up from the wiring. "You remember the tune?" Joe paused. "Not really, but sometimes when I drive past here, I swear I can still hear it." By late afternoon, the work was done. The last wire was connected. The last bulb tested. Jack flipped the main switch, and for the first time in decades, every light inside Sonny's diner came alive. It wasn't bright, not yet, but it was whole. The neon sign outside buzzed faintly, the jukebox lights blinked, and a soft glow filled the space. Touching every picture, every scar, every nail, Joe Jr. stood back and let out a long breath, eyes glistening. "She'd be proud," he said. "They both would." Jack turned to him. "Then maybe it's not just my diner anymore. Maybe it's ours." Joe chuckled quietly. "My dad used to say, this place lives because people put pieces of themselves in it. Looks like you did that too." They shared coffee that tasted like victory, bitter, strong, a little burnt. Jack poured some into a bowl for Ethan, who lapped at it happily, half milk, half pride. "Guess he's part of this too," Joe said with a grin. "Wouldn't have gotten this far without him," Jack replied. "He keeps me moving when I'd rather stop." Joe nodded. "Dogs know. They remember the best parts of us, even when we forget." The two men sat there, the hum of the light steady above them. Outside, wind rolled across the highway, carrying the faint sound of church bells from somewhere down the valley. For a moment neither man spoke. Then Joe said quietly, "You know, my mom had this saying. She'd tell me, the diner doesn't stay alive because of the food. It stays alive because of kindness." Jack looked around at the walls, at the repaired signs, at the empty booths waiting for life to fill them again. "She was right," he said. "Kindness built this place once. Guess it's building it again." When Joe Jr. finally got up to leave, the sky had turned copper. The light outside stretched long and soft across the diner floor. He stood by the door, hand resting on the frame. "If you ever need help with the generator, or anything else, you call me. I've got some parts lying around. And I owe this place a few favors." Jack smiled. "I'll hold you to that." Joe nodded. then looked one more time at his parents' photo. He touched the frame gently, the way you touch a memory. Then he said, almost to himself, feels like they're home again. After the truck disappeared down the road, Jack stayed outside a while, watching the dust settle. The diner glowed behind him, a lighthouse in miniature, pulsing softly against the darkening world. Ethan came up beside him, pressing close, tail brushing his knee. Another good man, huh? Jack murmured. The dog gave a quiet bark, as if to agree. Jack looked back at the lights through the window, the handiwork of two sons, one of blood, one of chance. And he thought, maybe that's what healing really is, strangers carrying the flame that someone else once started. Later that night, Jack turned off the sign, but the glow stayed in the glass for a moment longer than it should have, as if refusing to fade. Somewhere deep inside him, a voice, maybe his own, whispered, places don't die when people remember. He closed his eyes, when for the first time, the silence didn't sound empty, it sounded alive. Winter had settled over the valley like a soft white blanket, beautiful, but heavy, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. The diner's roof creaked under a thin layer of snow, and every window glowed faintly from the single space heater humming in the corner. Jack sat in his usual booth with a chipped mug of instant coffee that barely qualified as coffee. Ethan lay beside him, nose tucked under his tail, his fur rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. Outside, the world was silent, not the silence of peace, but of pause, everything waiting, everything holding its breath. Jack rubbed his hands together, watching the frost form on the inside of the glass. Guess it's just us again, buddy, he said softly. Ethan's tail thumped once against the floor, as if to answer, that's enough. Then, from somewhere far off, came the low rumble of an engine. At first, Jack thought he imagined it a trick of memory, maybe, but the sound grew louder, closer, until headlights swept across the window, cutting through the snow. A semi pulled into the lot, hissing as it stopped. Its driver's door opened, and a man climbed out tall, wrapped in layers of flannel and fatigue, his beard frosted white. He stomped snow from his boots before pushing open the diner door. The little bell above it gave a weak jingle. Morning, the man said, his voice rough but friendly. Didn't think anyone was open out here. Jack smiled faintly. We're not exactly open, he said, just awake. The driver looked around the place, the patched boots, the warm glow, the old photographs on the wall. He nodded, approvingly. Hell of a spot you got here. Got any coffee? Jack hesitated, then chuckled. Not real coffee. But I've got hot water and half a jar of instant. It'll fool you for a few sips. The driver laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Close enough for me. Jack poured from the dented kettle into a cracked ceramic mug, one of the few survivors from the old days. The steam rose in thin curls, filling the air with that faint, comforting smell of something warm. He slid the cup across the counter. Careful, it's hotter than it looks. The driver took a slow sip. He paused, swallowed, and smiled. Damn, he said. That's the best coffee I've had all week. Jack grinned. Guess the secret's in the rust. They both laughed. Ethan trotted over, sniffing at the stranger's boots, tail wagging in small, cautious arcs. Who's this guy? The driver asked. Ethan, Jack said. Best co-worker I've ever had. The man bent down and scratched behind Ethan's ears. Good boy, bet he doesn't complain much, not about the hours. At least, Jack said. For a while, they talked about the road, about how lonely some places could get, and about how small kindnesses keep a man going. The driver said his name was Tom. He hauled goods up and down the interstate, always on the move. Been driving this route for years, he said. But I never noticed this place before. Jack nodded. It was asleep for a long time. Tom looked around, eyes softening. Well, it's awake now. When he finished his drink, he stood up, dug into his pocket, and pulled out a $5 bill. He laid it gently on the counter. For the coffee, he said. Jack frowned. You don't have to, I know, Tom interrupted, but I want to. Some places deserve to have the lights on. He pulled his hat low and headed for the door. The bell jingled again, and the cold air swept in before the door closed behind him. Jack stood there for a moment, staring at the bill on the counter, just $5 crumpled, worn, and wholly in its own way. He picked it up slowly, smoothing the creases with his thumb. Ethan watched him, tail wagging softly. Guess that makes it official, Jack said. We've had our first customer. The dog barked once, as if in celebration. Jack smiled. Yeah, I thought so too. He tucked the $5 bill into a jar beside the register, an old pickle jar labeled Sonny's Fund. Then he leaned against the counter, listening to the faint hum of the heater, the snow whispering against the windows. and the sound of Ethan's tail tapping like a heartbeat. Outside, Tom's truck rumbled to life and pulled back onto the highway. Its taillights disappeared into the white horizon, but in their wake, the dyno felt different. Not warmer, not louder, just alive. For months, the place had been a dream stitched together with nails, dust, and hope. But now, for the first time, it functioned. Someone had come, sat down, drank something, paid for it, and believed, if only for a few minutes, that Sonny's diner was still part of the living world. Jack stood there a long time, looking around at what he and Ethan had rebuilt. "This is how it starts," he murmured, "one person at a time." Ethan pressed his head against Jack's leg, his tail sweeping slow arcs across the floor. Jack scratched behind his ears. "You know," he said, "I think Sonny would have liked that guy." The dog let out a low, contented whine, as if agreeing. Later, Jack poured himself another mug of instant coffee and sat by the window. Snow kept falling, soft and endless. The neon sign outside flickered just once, then steadied, glowing against the white world. He thought of that $5 bill in the jar. It wasn't much, not enough to buy supplies or fix the heater. But it was something greater, proof that kindness was still out there, driving trucks through the cold, stopping for a cup of almost coffee, and leaving hope behind on a counter. Jack looked down at Ethan, now asleep beside his boots. Paws twitching in a dream. He smiled. "We did it, boy. The first one." The dog stirred, sighed, and went still again. Jack leaned back, eyes closing, listening to the snow and the silence, a silence that didn't ache anymore, but rested somewhere out on the highway. The wind carried the faint echo of an engine fading into the distance, and in that moment, Jack felt something stir inside him, small, fragile but alive, the kind of feeling that makes a man believe he hasn't been forgotten, the kind of feeling that says, "This is the beginning." Spring came late that year, not the kind that bursts open with color and warmth, but a slow thaw, the kind where snow melts in secret, under sunlight too shy to stay. The ground was still pale, the air still sharp, but you could feel something shifting, something waking up. At Sonny's diner, the icicles had finally melted from the gutters. The neon sign, once dark and forgotten, hung crookedly above the door, its yellow paint faded, its letters half buried in dust. Jack stood outside with Joe Jr., both men staring at it in silence. "Well," Joe said, rubbing his hands together, "you ready to see if she still remembers how to shine?" Jack chuckled. "She's been asleep a long time. Be gentle." Joe grinned. "No promises." Inside, Ethan lay by the counter, tail flicking lazily. He watched as the two men fiddled with wires, checked fuses, argued about voltage neither of them really understood. Finally, Joe looked at Jack and said, "Moment of truth." He flipped the switch. For a second, nothing happened, just the quiet hum of the old heater and the faint buzz of a loose wire. Then, slowly, a faint orange glow crept through the glass letters. S-U-N. The light flickered once, twice, and then the whole sign came alive. Sonny's. It wasn't perfect. A few bulbs stuttered. One letter blinked in and out like it couldn't quite make up its mind. But it was there, glowing against the early spring dusk, shimmering across puddles on the wet asphalt. Jack stepped outside, looking up at it. The reflection of that light danced on the window, on the chrome of the old coffee machine, and finally on Ethan's face. The dog tilted his head, his eyes catching the glow to small suns flickering back. Jack smiled. "He looks happy," he said softly. Joe nodded. "So do you." Jack didn't answer, but he felt it, somewhere deep inside. That light was warming a place he thought was gone for good. The days grew longer, and little by little, the world began to wander back to life. At first, it was just one or two travelers who pulled off the road to stretch their legs. Then came a couple of locals, curious, cautious, drawn in by that flickering sign that had somehow survived the winter. They didn't come for the food. The coffee was instant, the eggs were overcooked, and the pie came from a frozen box Joe found at a discount store. But they came anyway. They came for the warmth, for the sound of an old dog snoring by the counter, for the quiet music Jack played on the radio, for the sight of that neon light buzzing faintly in the evening. There was something in the air at Sonny's that felt safe, like hope had a place to sit down again. Jack started keeping a little notebook by the register, an old journal he found in a drawer. "Write something if you feel like it," he told people, "anything at all." At first, the pages were mostly doodles and road directions, phone numbers and jokes. But then, slowly, the words began to change. One morning, Jack opened the book and found a new message written in clean, careful handwriting. "This place makes me believe again." He stared at it for a long time. His throat tightened. Ethan looked up at him. Ears perked. Jack reached down and scratched the dog's head, his voice soft. Guess we're doing something right. The dog wagged his tail once slow and steady, like a heartbeat. By April, the diner was no longer quiet. The old coffee pot barely kept up. Someone donated new mugs. A local musician left a guitar by the wall in case anyone feels like playing. A mother came in one afternoon with a little girl, and the child left behind a drawing of Ethan under a sun made of yellow crayons. Jack pinned it to the bulletin board beside the register. Each day felt lighter than the one before. When he flipped a switch at dusk, the neon letters buzzed to life like they were breathing, like the diner itself was proud to still exist. Sometimes, Joe would stop by after his shift at the hardware store. They'd sit in the same booth, watching the headlights pass by outside. "You ever think she'd shine again?" Joe asked once. Jack smiled, eyes on the glowing sign through the glass. "No," he said, "but I think she always meant to." Late one evening, after closing, Jack sat at the counter, flipping through the notebook again. It was full now, pages covered in messages from strangers who had found their way through the door. Some wrote about loss, some wrote about love. A few just left their names, as if to say, "I was here, I existed, I mattered." And then there was that one line again, circled in blue ink. "This place makes me believe again." Jack traced the letters with his thumb, eyes glistening under the soft neon light. For the first time in a long while, he felt no emptiness, no echo of what was lost, only the quiet fullness of what had been found. Outside, spring had finally taken hold. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and wildflowers. The highways shimmered under the moonlight, stretching on and on, endless as always. But inside, sunny, time felt still, a little pocket of warmth against the wide, restless world. Jack poured the last cup of coffee for himself, leaned on the counter, and looked at Ethan, sleeping peacefully by the door. He smiled. "You know," he said softly, "I think we brought the light back." The dog stirred, tail flicking once. "Yeah," Jack whispered, "I think Sonny would have liked this." He looked through the window at the glowing sign, flickering, imperfect, and alive, and for the first time in years, he didn't just see light, he felt it. The light had returned, and so had they. By summer, Sonny's diner had come fully alive again. The sign buzzed softly above the highway, its neon letters humming against the night, steady now, confident. Inside, the air carried the smell of coffee, toast, and warm laughter. There was always laughter. Someone would drop a fork, a chair would scrape, a child would giggle at Ethan, who'd long since claimed the spot under the counter as his kingdom. There were stories told between bites, soft songs hummed between strangers, and the sound of glasses gently clinking like the rhythm of a steady heart. The diner, once hollow and forgotten, now had a pulse again. Joe Jr. still stopped by once a month. He'd walk through the door, always pretending he wasn't tearing up when he saw the lighted sign. "You missed a bulb," he'd say, pointing up at the flickering Y. Jack would laugh. "Keeps her humble." Joe would sit, order the same thing, black coffee, no sugar, and start tinkering with something. The old man couldn't sit still. He'd polish the jukebox, tighten loose wires, oil the hinges on the front door, and while he worked, he'd talk, usually about nothing. Stories from his dad, bad jokes, half-finished memories. But sometimes, when the evening quieted and only the hum of the neon filled the air, he'd tell Jack what the place meant to him. "This diner," Joe said once, setting down his screwdriver, "was where my mum used to stand, right there by the window. She'd wave at every trucker that passed, even the ones that didn't stop, said maybe they needed to know someone saw them." Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "I think I understand that." Joe smiled a small, knowing smile and went back to work. Nights came softer now. Jack slept on the same cracked leather bench. Ethan curled up beside him, head resting on his boots. The sound of the highway no longer echoed like war drums. It was just life, moving on. He hadn't heard gunfire in his dreams for months. Only the steady breathing of a dog and the faint creak of the diner cooling after a long day. Sometimes he'd wake before dawn and just sit, watching the first light crawl across the floorboards. The world outside still carried scars, empty towns, shuttered stations, silence stretching across the plains, but inside Sonny's there was warmth, and that warmth felt earned. One afternoon, a woman traveling alone stopped by. She sat at the counter, sipping her coffee slowly, looking around the room like she was searching for something invisible. Finally, she asked, "How'd you manage to bring this place back?" Jack paused. He didn't have an easy answer. He looked at the walls, at the photos of Sonny and Joe, at the messages scrolled in the notebook, at the patches of paint where the old stains still showed through. He looked at the neon light flickering through the window, spilling gold across the tables. Then he said, quietly, "Time, sweat, and good people." The woman smiled, as if that was exactly the answer she needed. When evening came, Jack poured himself a small cup of coffee and took his usual seat by the window. Ethan lay at his feet, snoring softly, a sound Jack had come to think of as music. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in long streaks of orange and pink. The light hit the diner's sign just right, making it glow brighter than ever. For a moment, Jack simply watched, no words, no thoughts, just the hum of the neon and the steady rise and fall of his dog's breathing. He reached down, rested a hand on Ethan's back, and whispered, "We did all right, buddy." Ethan stirred, gave a sleepy tail wag, and went right back to dreaming. Later that night, when Joe Jr. stopped by, the diner was quiet. The last customer had left, and only the two of them remained, two men who had inherited someone else's hope and somehow made it their own. Jack nodded toward the glowing sign. "She's holding steady tonight." Joe smiled. "Told you she would." They sat in silence for a while, the way men do when there's nothing left to fix and nothing left to prove. Finally, Jack leaned back, exhaling a long, contented breath. "You know," he said softly, "Sonny's wasn't saved by money, or luck, or some miracle." Joe raised an eyebrow. "No." Jack shook his head, eyes still on the window. "It was saved by a broken soldier, a loyal dog, and $15 worth of faith." The words hung in the air, simple, honest, final. Joe didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Outside, the sign hummed quietly against the dark, its light reflecting in both men's eyes. Later, when Jack locked the door and turned off the lights, the diner didn't feel empty, it felt alive. He walked to the window one last time and looked out at the highway, a ribbon of silver stretching into forever. Somewhere out there, more lost souls were wandering. More hearts were waiting for a place to rest. Maybe one day they'd find their way here. Jack smiled, turned the sign to closed, and whispered into the stillness, "Good night, Sonny." Then he bent down, scratched Ethan's ear, and said, "Come on, partner, time to rest." As they disappeared into the back room, the diner remained glowing faintly under the stars, alive with every laugh, every breath, every kindness that had ever passed through its doors. And if you drove down that road on a quiet summer night, you might still see it, a small flicker of light in the middle of nowhere, proof that sometimes what remains isn't ruins or sorrow. It's warmth, it's memory, it's love refusing to die. Sonny's diner, open or closed, was still shining.